Greetings! It's the Mega Matt Cat. And the game of the day, as you can see on the screen, is Earth Defense Force 2025. This is my review. Now, as you know, I'm known as the Solo Gamer. And I picked this up because I was a huge fan of the previous one. And I have to say that so far, just to give you my first impressions, I am loving this game way more than the previous one, and I loved the previous one. But what is EDF? Well, if you're familiar with it, you know what it is, but for those of you new to the series, it's a third-person action shooter that takes many of its notes from B-movies of the 50s, 60s, you know, Invasion of the Killer Insects, giant spaceships obliterating the Earth, that kind of stuff. But it's done in the cheesy, campy, over-the-top style that was so prevalent back in those days, using, of course, modern technology to give it a bit of a shine that it wouldn't have had back then. Now, this game, pardon me, this game is one of those things that it's sort of adapted a cult following when it finally got stateside. It had been known about, but nobody had actually gotten a chance to play it because it wasn't released over in the US for, God, years and years. In Japan and in Europe, it was actually very, very common and fairly popular. But when they released 2017, they discovered a massive cult following for it here in the States. So, we now get 2025. And previously, they'd released a updated version of 2017 for the Vita, which I also have, which was good. But because of the success of that, we now get this bad boy. And in this game, you fight monsters and robots and spaceships and all kinds of other stuff with an awesome arsenal of weapons, 4 different classes to play as, and in environments that range from hilly countryside to cluttered and jumbled cities to who knows where, underground tunnels and all kinds of stuff. I haven't even beaten the game yet, and I've already seen a wide variety of options. Now the game is pretty simple. You know, controls are straightforward. You've got, you know, you got 2 guns, you've got the jump ability or dodge ability, you can drive vehicles using the left and right joysticks, and depending upon what character you're playing as, you have different weapons and options. And we'll get into all that in the gameplay section when I discuss the classes. But we're going to get started here with the story, which, thankfully, not all that complicated in this case. So, where do we start with the story? Well, we start with giant alien spaceships invading the Earth. How about that? Okay, so yeah, it's not quite that straightforward at first. Basically, this is a sequel to 217, and in 217, Earth got invaded, we managed to fight them off, we blew up their mothership, that kind of yada yada yada. Well, now they're back, they've brought more troops and ships, and they're ticked the crap off at us. Now, you start out here as just some lowly scrub fighting off various giant insects and monsters. Usually ants, then spiders, and then variations on those. But that's where you start. But before long, I mean, you know, the game has 80 missions or something, and I'm barely 30 in, but you're soon fighting a city-sized spacecraft that blocks out the sky. You are not seeing things. That is being rendered in the game in real time, folks. And it is amazing to see. Now, gameplay-wise, the core of any game, you have 4 classes. And the game has a lot of interesting features. There's lots of enemies at once, variety of layouts. The classes offer very, very good playstyles, and the environments are fully destructible. You can level everything you can see. If it's more than a story tall, it can fall to the ground. Now, the Ranger class has the best weapons, good armor, effective dodge, and they can also drive vehicles. It makes them a jack of all trades, so to speak. Now, like, this game does balance its classes, so they don't have a dash function. They can be swarmed easily because of that. They need to reload their weapons constantly, and they have limited mobility, so they don't have a lot of vertical, you know, up and above type abilities. They're mostly a ground fighter. Now, not new to the series, but new to the American series is the Wing Diver, who is a continuation of the Pale Wings that were released in the Vita game. They're highly mobile, they have unique and powerful energy weapons, their special gear can create new tactics, and they're able to escape from dangerous swarms and enemy attacks by flying away quickly. Now that being said, some of their weapons are hard to use, certain enemies are naturally a counter though, and most weapons drain their jetpack power directly, plus their armor is exceedingly weak, leaving them very vulnerable to attack. They're sort of the high, quick, and run, you know? They hit fast, then they fade away. And they can fly, which is nice. Now there are, certain enemies like this giant orb weaver, what they call the Retarius, that counter it because he can capture and trap them and limits their mobility. The other spider characters are also the same. Now these are the air raiders, and they're sort of the support trooper of the game. Really what they boil down to is you send them in to back up, either the wing divers or the heavy fencers or maybe the rangers. Now they've got a interesting variety of weaponry. All of them are explosive so far as I've seen. They can call in airstrikes. They have a great support ability, creating shields, healing areas, and guard posts. And they can call in various vehicles for support use. Now, that being said, the supports are limited and they can, run into trouble because they can't summon them frequently. And I'll explain that in a moment when I get to the cons. Also, some of their vehicles are not quite as effective as you'd like. Now, their weak armor compared to the Ranger. More powerful than the wing divers, but still not the same. They don't have any direct attack weapons, no guns or rifles. They're not good for single player, I've learned that the hard way, and some of the vehicles can be very difficult to use. You can only refill the airstrikes by killing your targets. The more you kill, the faster it reloads. Now, on to the last, the Fencer. Now the Fencer is the most powerful unit in the game in terms of raw firepower. He can have up to 4 weapons of any kind he wants. However, there are of course downsides to that, so we'll get to that in a moment. Now, the upsides of the Fencer, and I think he's the best single player unit once you know how to use him. He has the best armor in the game. He can wield up to 4 different weapons. Some weapons give him a dash, which speeds him up. He can do both close and long range combat, and the shields give him defensive options no other class will have. Now, on the other hand, that is all good and well, but he also controls differently from other characters and takes a little getting used to. Plus, like all the other characters, he has his disadvantages. Now, he's the slowest of the game. Even with that dash, which can be very handy, he's still the slowest overall. His weapons are tough to aim because of recoil. His close combat is a blast, but it can be very risky. And he's extremely vulnerable to swarm tactics from the insects. In fact, he's the most vulnerable in that regard. Now, with those 4 classes, you've got a lot of different gameplay options. So this can be a fun game, especially in teams. Now, moving on to the technical aspects, the graphics and the sound. Now, as you can see, this game is sort of a mixed bag when it comes to graphical abilities. There's some things it does extremely well, and there's other things that it does not so much. Now, as you can see here, the graphical pros that this game has are lots of enemies, fully destructible environments, weapon explosions that look great, weapon effects in general that look great. The robotic enemies are pretty cool looking, and the spiders in particular are creepy and disturbing, which makes them really awesome. Or at least thematically appropriate, I suppose. Now, that being said, their focus on those particular areas does mean that there's certain areas in which this game, especially compared to its contemporaries, will fall short. And, for example, the ant and the wasp enemies look cheesy, almost like plastic models. And also, some of the models aren't very detailed or have details in the wrong place. Frame rate can chug a bit, the screen can become very cluttered, and there's very little lighting effects. You don't see a lot of lighting effects or, special light effects like suns or, sunbeams or volumetric lighting. This isn't Half-Life, and that's obvious when you play it. There's some areas where it focuses its energy, and there's others where it completely disregards it. Now, on to the sounds themselves. The other technical aspect, at least as far as that's concerned. Now the music is fitting. The weapons sound great. The chatter can be funny, and it is campy, which is appropriate. And some of the enemies sound very good, very menacing. Now, some of the voice acting, on the other hand, starts to grate, like bad. The sounds can get very cluttered, especially if there's a lot going on. And not all the enemies sound all that interesting. In fact, some of them sound just pretty pathetic. It's, again, a great example of a mixed bag. Now, moving on to the features and to the rating that I gave the game. Now, this is my rating, and it's subjective. Now, the publisher of this game is D3 Entertainment, and the developer was Sandlot, which is the group that's done it in the past. And they've actually included some new features here that I thought was really cool. The most notable being online co-op multiplayer. Now, I'm going to just lay this on the table right away. As far as the online multiplayer, I've played a little. I didn't get any video of it at the time because I didn't realize I needed to record it. I forgot about that. But what I have played was fun, energetic, and so long as you've got a good group of people with you, can be a real blast. Now, of course, griefers and other junk are going to show up. I mean, it is the internet. But when you have a group of friends together and you're all playing together as a team, the game is just an absolute ball. And the destructible environments make it even more so because you and your team will wind up leveling like the entire city. Now, there are some downsides. There's lag a bit when you play the co-op, though it's not bad. It's actually fairly manageable. It's actually worse in split-screen co-op because there's so much going on at one time that the game actually gets to chugging really bad because of it. Also notable is that the game doesn't really have, well, I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. There's some stuff that's not explained. Your progression as far as your weapons are concerned, the fact that you'll get certain weapons by beating certain levels does come up frequently, but it's never outright stated. And some of the levels require certain weapon loadouts, but nobody mentions this or even recommends it. Now, those are all flaws, and I'll give the game that. It has its downsides. There are some things that it's not really good at. But at the end of the day, the game is such an absolute rush and so much fun to play that I can't really fault it for that. At the end of the day, this is a game that's all about getting out on the field and wiping out hordes of giant monsters. It's like, how can you go wrong? When I've played it, and I've played it, at least 15 plus hours now, I had an absolute thrill. And the rush of acquiring new weapons and armor is a great rush. As you play the game, you'll unlock new weapons, get new equipment, and, find different things that you can do by picking up items dropped by your foes. And this is the type of game that mixes a lot of different various things together into a very interesting package. Some of it doesn't work, true enough. Some of it works very well, even more so. But at the end of the day, there's just something cathartically fun about getting in there and wiping out entire hordes of monsters with rocket launchers, shotguns, and a variety of different weapons. The addition of the 3 extra classes and all the weapons they bring gives you even more variety and fun. And what's even better is the inclusion of the online multiplayer in addition to the split-screen co-op does just nothing but add more fun to the game. Sure, there's flaws and there's problems and there's all kinds of things one can bring against it. And to be fair, I'm one of those who calls it out on its failings just the same as anyone. The lack of lighting effects is kind of sad given the power of the PS3. And the fact that this was released on the PS3 rather than on the PS4, I feel that's a bit of a shame. But at the end of the day, it's still a great game to play, and when you're in the middle of a pitched battle with a bunch of monsters and ships and aliens and God knows what else, you really won't be thinking about the downsides. You'll be too busy shooting for your life. So, my final rating is 4 out of 5 stars, and that is again just my personal viewpoint. I would recommend that anybody who's unsure, give it a try. Anybody who is a fan of the series should definitely check it out. And anyone who hasn't played it, well, I'd say I'd say at least give it a try first before you judge it. Again, my final rating on this game is 4 out of 5 stars, and it's definitely worth the time if you get a chance to play it. It's available on PSN right now, and if you can get some friends together, I think people will generally have a good time with it. I still feel that there's some things that could be improved in the series overall, but I was having way too much fun to complain. Anyway, this is the Solo Gamer, the Mega Mac Cat. I will see you next time when I continue my Gundam video game series.
Rangers can equip 2 weapons.